Good morning, my fellow Canadians. Anybody who knows me knows that I love Canadian history. Years back, I had a young lady turn to me and said, Canadian history is boring. And I pointed out to her, Canadian history is far from boring. It's rich, exciting, interesting. It was taught in a boring manner. It was when I went through school. It was dull, dry. No one, no teacher brought it to life. Now, that's changed somewhat. I won't go on about the educational system I have. I start this preamble because tradition, history, whether it's a person or a society or a culture, it's important to know where you came from. So, an unfiltered look at your past, like I said, whether it's an individual or a society, allows you to chart your progress, where you've got to versus where you were, how far you've traveled, even on a journey. You're doing a journey of 2,000 miles. When you covered 1,000 miles, you can look back at the 1,000 miles you've covered and at the places you have yet to go, your destination. So, for a society, cancel culture particularly, to try to cancel elements of your history, you're destroying your culture. Even if they're unpleasant elements, they are history. They chart your progress. People who were psychologically damaged, who have had therapy and come through, the smart ones don't forget what they were, because that is how you gauge who you are and how far you've come. The reason I bring this up is because this is very difficult for me to say with my love of history and tradition. I think it's time to disband the RCMP. And it pains me greatly to see that. It was the iconic symbol of Canada, Hollywood movies, Rosemary, things like this, Sergeant Preston of the Yukon. But the RCMP is, I think, currently a disaster. I look at Meyerthorpe, Alberta. They have tried to cover up and conceal the fact that those four constables died for no good reason. Solid intelligence and better tactical awareness, situational awareness, would have resulted in those four constables not being murdered. Portapique, they're still concealing a lot of information about the Portapique massacre. The Polish traveler that they tasered to death at the airport. How difficult was it to find a Polish interpreter in Canada who could have assisted them and maybe defused the situation? And the one I saw captured on camera, the guy at a Tim Hortons, this is in the early days of COVID, in his car by himself outside with his coffee, and the RCMP officer writing him a ticket because he's not wearing a mask. And he said, I'm outside in my car. And this RCMP officer called him an asshole. That man should not be that man should not be carrying a badge and a gun. Now, I don't know, he was having a bad day. That was unprofessional, it was uncalled for, and it was totally ignorant. And those are just a few examples. I know there's more. Is it time to disband the RCMP? Brenda, whatever her last name is, I don't know how to pronounce it, the superintendent, first off, she's got very strong ties to the current Liberal Party. Secondly, did she get her position because she's a female and with her ties to the Liberal Party and Trudeau's feminism? Whatever, as a superintendent, I think she's been a freaking disaster. And I think the RCMP has lost its way and its reputation is badly, badly tarnished. So, should we disband them and have the provinces set up provincial police forces like Ontario, like Quebec, and get rid of the Mounties? I don't know. I do know, and I've mentioned this in previous posts, that the tone of any institution or organization morale, everything does not come from the bottom up. It is set from the top down. And if the RCMP is a failing organization, you look to the administration and the management, not to the constables. Like that constable who called the guy an asshole. Is he burned out? Is it time for him to go into an administrative position where he's not in public contact? There's story after story after story about RCMP stupidity, RCMP errors, mistakes, and a lot of it is being concealed from the Canadian public. So I really do ask, is it time the RCMP was disbanded and the provinces set up provincial police forces? There's a blueprint for that could be done with primary facilities and sub-facilities where the constables would be spread out farther, which would allow them to respond. I mean, you look at the prairies, you look at Alberta, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, BC, east where you have in the East Coast, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, where you have sometimes great distances between the actual RCMP detachments and the people they serve. The police set up substations in urban areas so that they could get a quicker response time. Should we consider that? I don't know. But I do think it is time to seriously ask if the RCMP should be disbanded. And one of the reasons I bring this up, again, is that piece of news I found out that Brian Peckford, and for those of you who aren't familiar who he is, I would suggest look at Wikipedia or look up, there's information coming out. Brian Peckford is the last surviving architect of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And he is taking the current Liberal government to court for violations of the Charter. Now, this is not someone who read the Charter and has interpreted. This was somebody who actually helped to draft the Charter. Now, this is important. He actually helped to draft the Charter. He not only knows the wording, but he knows the intent behind the wording. And he's pointed out that what Trudeau's Liberals have done is an absolute clear violation of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and some of their actions were out and out illegal. Illegal. Not just a matter of misfeasance or malfeasance, but actually illegal. Sadly, I pointed out to my buddy when he told me this, when you own the judiciary and law enforcement, who's going to prosecute you? If you own the RCMP, because this is a federal crime, are the RCMP going to investigate their masters objectively, like a police officer or peace officer should? I seriously doubt it. Not with Brenda at the head of, not with Brenda at the helm of the RCMP. And then you own the judiciary, and you know they will tie themselves into legal hoops not to prosecute the Liberals and Trudeau. So sadly, I'd love to see it succeed. The optimist in me says I'd love to see them held to task for what they've done. The pessimist in me says it's highly unlikely. Which is a sadness to me to watch my country deteriorate, which brings us to the convoy and the protests in Ottawa. I have a friend who's there. We were talking this morning. For the most part, it is exactly what it was designed to be. It's a massive protest that has gained international recognition. Peaceful, but determined. Then he saw some young guys. He doesn't think they were truckers. He's almost positive they were Antifa. And one of them was carrying a Nazi flag, a swastika. And he's a pretty bright cookie. And he said, the loony left and maybe even government agencies will try to infiltrate agitators into this peaceful protest. These agitators kick up trouble. And I would be willing to bet that if trouble forms, the mainstream media will be right there when the trouble forms, and they will be capturing it all on video and putting it out to the public. And this whole peaceful protest will be tainted with neo-Nazi symbolism, with violence, and people who follow mainstream media are still stupid enough to believe them will say, see, Trudeau was right. A lunatic fringe and violent right-wing extremists, etc., etc. And you know, this is entirely within the realm of possibility. This is entirely within the realm. This is almost a given that the government will try to do this using government agencies, RCMP intelligence, maybe even CSIS, to embed agitators into this rally, to taint the rally, to try to spin it into something it isn't. You watch. I hope I'm wrong. I pray to God I'm wrong, but I won't be surprised if I'm right. I had a friend of mine who is deeply disturbed by as I am, at the direction this country has been shoved into by those idiots in the Liberals. Canadian government. There's nothing Canadian about this government. There's nothing Canadian about Trudeau. It makes me want to throw up when I hear him talking about Canadians as if he even knows what he's talking about. He is not a Canadian. He's a globalist. He has no loyalty to this country. He has no concept of what Canada is. And of course, what did he do when the convoy hit? Run and hide. Oh, I was exposed to COVID. I have to go self-isolate. Yeah. A leader would stand there and come forward and say, okay, why are you doing this? What are your wishes? What are your concerns? That's what a leader would do. A true leader. Not run and hide under your bed like a frightened little 5-year-old. Just another nail in the coffin, another illustration of the childishness and stupidity of our so-called Prime Minister. So that's what I wanted to bring up today. People who watch, people who listen, be very, very, very wary of anything coming out of the mainstream media. I showed up at the support rally at Vaughan Mills here in Ontario. Global had their a chopper in the air, and they focused on a little group. And even though the chopper could have captured a huge swath of the rally, they focused on the little group and said hundreds of people showed up to support the convoy. I was there and I saw there were thousands of people just at that one location showing up to support the convoy. Thousands, not hundreds. Well, what are hundreds? And actually, there was a nice little bit of sophistry I'll share with you. Ezra Levant, at one of the protests in London, England, overheard one of the, again, British tame, bought and paid for media whores saying, well, we're going to write there were hundreds of people showing up to support Tommy Robinson. And Ezra confronted him and said, what do you mean hundreds? There's thousands here. You know what the reporter said? Well, thousands are just many hundreds. Cute, eh? Nice little bit of sophistry, nice little bit of wordplay there. How to spin something. And idiots out there who still believe in and follow the mainstream media will say, oh, there are hundreds of people. It doesn't sound like much until you realize thousands. Thank God for social media, and thank God for independent news networks like Druthers, Rebel, True North, God bless him, Andrew Lawton, and Candace Malcolm. More and more information. Anybody who's watched and followed social media, we are getting big legs and big kudos from our neighbors to the south, from Britain, and now convoys, truckers' convoys are forming all over the world, inspired by what Canada did and is doing. People who have had enough of this draconian, repressive, communist style diktats and the erosion of our rights, the erosion of our freedoms, and the lies underlying them. in spite of the medical evidence. So to all my fellow Canadians, I say this: be wary, be careful, but be proud, because Canada right now is inspiring the world. The world. Canada, nice little backwater Canada, that kind of place just off to one side, hardly ever mentioned. We are in the forefront of the freedom movement of the world. And that, for every Canadian heart that beats true and loves this country, be proud and take pride, every one of you. Let us hope this continues, because everybody who felt isolated and down, morose, you're not alone. There are hundreds of thousands, there are millions of Canadians standing with you all over this land. And now there are millions more supporters all over the world. And we have sparked this, Canada. God bless Canada. Now, before I sign off, I want to, something I would normally do is plug for anybody. At Vaughan Mills, there's a big Bass Pro Shop. They opened their doors. Come in, because it was cold up there. Come in, get warm. If you need the washrooms, here are the washrooms. They opened their doors to the protesters. And I took advantage. I got warm. I bought a pair of gloves, which it turns out I should have brought and I didn't have with me. So I have 100% respect and a giant thank you to Bass Pro for what they did for us. Nobody said a word about masks. Nobody said a word about vaccine passports. Come in, get warm. Washrooms are over there if you need. God bless you for acting like Canadians. To my fellow Canadians, take heart. This could be the start of a shift back towards common sense, back towards Canadian values, taking back our country and making it what it could be and should be. And in previous posts I've said, properly administered, Canada could be and should be a paradise. Properly administered, it can be again. But it's up to you, to me, and to every Canadian. Get the Liberals out of there. Thank you, my fellow Canadians. Have a great day.